Okay, all right. I just got the go-ahead, people. So I'm going to start. Hi. Good evening, everybody. Hi. Sorry I wasn't here last week, but I understand it was a good program. Really good. So next week we have Ben Shattuck as promised. His subject is the 6 walks in the footsteps of Henry David Thoreau. Our brick campaign is ongoing, and our first order is going in soon, so get your applications in. Kathy's been passing them out, and you can get an application online as well. This week, I want to thank our sponsors, Jeff and Nancy Belzekian. I don't think they're here, but thank you, Jeff and Nancy. And I also understand that we have a guest baker, Rita Honan. Is Rita here? I know she's here because she brought the food, so that's good. All right, so this evening we're very privileged to have with us Lee Roscoe. Called Genius by Martha's Vineyard Gazette, Lee Roscoe will talk about her book, Wampanoag Art for the Ages, an Eric Hoffer Prize finalist for excellence in indie publishing. She will share with us the lifeway of the tribe which greeted the pilgrims through the tribal arts from the wetu to the regalia, pottery, matting, wampum, and featuring some of the tribe's foremost artisans. Lee Roscoe is a longtime journalist, currently writing for Artscope and Provincetown magazines. She is the author of Dreaming Monomoy's Past, Walking Its Present. As a playwright, most recently she wrote and directed the film Dreams from a Planet in Peril. Lee is also an awarded environmentalist, a Woods Hole Ocean Science Journalism Fellow. Tonight, let's welcome Lee Roscoe.
Well, thank you so much for being here and helping me build cultural bridges. Can everyone hear me? I'm on. Okay, great. So I do want to start off by saying I am not Wampanoag. Lee Roscoe is not Wampanoag. I'm not Indigenous. But because of a long time of doing journalism and covering things Indigenous and activism over the years, I was privileged with access to the artisans in my book. So imagine, if you will, let's start back at the beginning. There we go. The book is Wampanoag Art for the Ages, Traditional and Transitional, and the Vineyard Gazette didn't call me a genius. That'd be great. They just call the book Genius. So imagine creating your life directly from nature, and in that creation is an artful life with the immediacy, the freedom and independence, the beauty and challenge of a lifeway which combines the material with the spiritual, creating your needs self-sufficiently with trees like cedar and chestnut, plants like cattails and bulrush, shells like quahog and whelk, with animals such as deer and wolf, with bog copper. So I always like to say that for the Wampanoag, as with all indigenous cultures of Turtle Island, art is not separated from life, nor spirit from material. There is none of our Western Euro-Judeo-Christian ethic of dominance over the earth. Rather, everything has spirit, is alive, and man is no better and no worse than everything in nature. So art results from supplying needs in season with hands and body from earth. It wasn't created to hang on a wall without a use, but an integral part of providing the basics of food, shelter, clothing, and even entertainment, and importantly, of ceremony. And while ceremonial objects were and are created in and of themselves, and I'll be talking about some of them as much as I was privileged to ask, more quotidian objects such as a flute or a simple eating bowl carved from a burl, can express the sacred, because as Wampanoag and other indigenous elders will tell you, there's always reciprocity between human beings themselves, human beings and animals, human beings and plants, and the whole universe, between what you're taking and what you're giving back. So the book really starts in the Witu, which is the home, and this is actually not a Wampanoag Witu, but it is an Algonquian Witu, and the Wampanoag Nation is part of the Algonquian language group, and that's an affiliated group which goes all the way from the southeast of our nation, of our country, up through our area and into Canada, and is interjected on the East Coast by the Iroquoian peoples. So the Witu, as you can see there, is created with cedar saplings, and they are taken early in the spring when they are flexible, and they are tied together often with cedar bark. And the Witu is kind of representative of a womb. The saplings, as Anawan Whedon, who is a Witu builder, who is the informant for my information on Witus in this book, as he has told me, the Witu poles are always set with prayer because they create a connection with the earth. Not only are we disrupting earth by digging, he says, but we're creating a bond between the pole and the earth. So the Witu is not separate from the earth, but one with it. And there's also typically Wampanoag duality here, a subtle male and femaleness to this as well. So when the Witu poles are set, maybe some of you were up at Truro when there was a Witu that was set, they're set with prayer and with ceremony. There are two different types, a number of different types, but these are the basic different types of Witus. The one on the left is the summer Witu. It's smaller and more of a nuclear family, an extended nuclear family. And the one on the right is the longhouse or winter Witu, and that is usually run, and when I say run, that's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a Western construct, but it's in the domain of women because the tribe is matrilineal and matrilocal. So the summer Witus are about 15 feet across, about 12 feet high, and the winter longhouse, a fairly average Nush Witu, is a three-fire house. It's about 30 feet long by 20 feet wide by 12 feet high. And as Anawan will tell you, and by the way, what's in front is a Mishoon. I don't cover that in the book, but it's the traditional dugout canoe that was an ocean-going canoe that the Wampanoag people used and created. So Anawan would always say that the round form is warmer, circulating air, it's airier, and it prevents abuse to the structure during storms. I'm going back and forth between two sets of notes here, so if I'm a bit of a klutz, bear with me. And if any of you have been at Plymouth Patuxet museums, there's a little contention around them, but the place with the tribe. But nonetheless, if you've been there ever in the winter and you've been inside a Witu, it is much warmer than those square and drafty pilgrim houses. And in fact, there are accounts in Mort's Relation, which is kind of the first journal that Winslow and Bradford allegedly, nobody's 100% sure, wrote, of going into Witus in the middle of winter and being so warm that they were sweating. And Julia Marden, who's another one of my informants I'll get to, talks about that, how very warm the Witu can be. So what we're looking at here is a summer Witu, and it's covered in cattail matting. And the winter Witu was covered in bark, and the interiors were bulrush, twined bulrush matting, usually. I'm just going to bear with me while I get to the notes that I need. One of the interesting things, by the way, about the cedar that is used, they are sacred to the Wampanoag. They're part of the creation. And I was asked not to repeat certain things, so I'm not going to repeat it. But one of the things I was allowed to say, which Jonathan Perry, who is one of my informants, told me, is that the cedar protect us in winter. They watch over creation when everything sleeps. I think that's really beautiful. Interesting, just go back for a minute, if I can figure out how to go back. Okay. I remember I asked Anawan that when you go into a Witu, there's a kind of a pattern of 4 at the top of the summer Witu. And the doors are placed, the eastern door is placed there for a reason, to face the dawn, and these are the people of the dawn. But I asked him about the patterns at the top of the Witu, and if there was a connection between the 4 winds, the 4 cardinal directions. Does that connect to major belief figures? Does that connect to the cycle of life, the cycle from dawn to dusk, the cycle of the seasons? And he said, yes. And that's about all he would give me. But the number 4 is sacred to many tribes across this country, and Anawan responded that for some of us, the sacred number is 6. For some tribes, it's 7, and for the Anishinaabe people, as I understand it, it's 8. So, talking about the matting, which is so Julia Marden was my informant for creating twined matting, and she's a museum quality artist. And she says that the twine designs are and were geometric, floral, of the 4 directions and of the sacred tree of life. And they are used fibers of cattails, bulrushes, corn husks, false nettle, butterfly weed, milkweed, dogbane, the inner bark of basswood and cedar. All of them can be rubbed in strands of 2 on a thigh until they're spun long enough to use. And they're dyed with such as bloodroot, staghorn sumac, walnut, and chestnut husks, to colors including some of the ones you see there, yellow, orange, red, black, brown. It's an ancient art in which you twist more than one strand of weft around 1 or more warps and use your fingers and no loom. And the warps attach to a tree branch, or you can even lay the fibers out, from what she's told me, on your lap using a cross pattern of stranding. It's a multi-generational task. It's something that is time-consuming. The fiber is gathered at a certain time of year, and it's really a long process. There's a lot on it in the book. I find it absolutely fascinating, and perhaps for anyone who's a weaver, they would find it really interesting as well. This is an ancient cedar twine bag. It's not Wampanoag, it's Chippewa, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, because twining was used to create not just mats for the interior of Witus, but mats that cover corn caches. I'm going to go back to this. This is the interior of Witu with the matting. It's really beautiful. So the twining was used to create storage bags and the storage containers. This is something that Julia Martin created actually with her granddaughter. I mentioned multi-generational. She's carrying on this tradition from her daughter to her granddaughter, and they work on things together. And actually, the granddaughter created this one on her own, this carry bag. Another thing that that Julia has brought back is the twining of turkey mantle cloaks. And she has them for her Aninuag, her dolls. But she's also recently completed one, I think she was just honored for it at the Tamaquag Museum. She's completed one that's a whole body twined mat. It's an ancient art that she's helped to revive. And she's also helped to revive the creation of horseshoe crab baskets, which again, Moritz, the first intruders to the land, came into Samuitu's uninvited in the Nauset area, and they saw a horseshoe crab container, and they wrote about it, and she's brought that craft back. I do have a picture of it in the book. There's more of her work. So going back to one of the things that is talked about is how those cattail mats are so sophisticated. I mean, these people have been on this land for 12,000 years, and it's not primitive. It's really sophisticated. This method of creating a home, these cattail mats let the rain run off and keep a kind of air pocket that helps insulate the Witu. So it's a really clever and functional way to create a shelter. So just to touch on matriarchy for a minute in Wampanoag life, Bear Clan Mother Bear, Anita Peters, who is in the book, and I will get to her because she's a regalia maker. She says that you get your clan affiliation from your mother's side. The clan mother is chosen by the families, and they in turn chose the male leaders. And the women should really, I love it because it was feminism before there was such a thing. And the women in turn chose the male leaders, those which took care of the most people the most by giving away the most. Some of the Mashpee Wampanoag clans include bear, turtle, beaver, otter, eel, and rabbit. And throughout North America, clan systems in general, each animal will confer certain attributes and benefits upon the clans, which are in turn responsible. They have responsibilities for certain governance of tribal life, and they have responsibilities to reciprocate the clan animals with ceremonial obligations. Ramona Peters once told me that there were actually treaties made with whales, for instance. And I just find that so beautiful because it's kind of the power of metaphor that carries you into the natural world and carries it back to you. I just want to mention this basket is a really good indicator of what a lot of the artisans told me, and that is that they are influenced by their ancestors. They have received information from ancestors. Sometimes they have learned things through the controversial Plymouth Patuxet from each other. Sometimes the reconstruction of ways to do things comes through visions. It's something that we in the West don't quite understand. But dreams and visions, for instance, Jessie Little Doe Baird, who is the founder of the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. The original inspiration and understanding came through visions and dreams. There's another form. Oh, yeah, I know what I was going to say about this. Yeah. A lot of the artisans say that while they're influenced by their ancestors, they, like all of us, have evolved. They're in the modern world. They're here. And so they don't want their art necessarily to be solely traditional, hence transitional. It's a synthesis between past and present. So these are not traditional designs on here. They're Julia's interpretation. And that is with a lot of the artists. There is that synthesis between tradition and modernity, which I think is really beautiful. You can see on this a tump line, which is finger woven. And the only bit of information I did not get from the horse's mouth was from a Smithsonian institution, National Museum of the American Indian Film, and Marlene Lopez, who is a beloved, she's the daughter of the late beloved Chief Vernon Lopez, who recently passed away at the age of 101. She talks about finger weaving, that there is a center eye, which is creation watching. The strands bring individuals together to create community. The energy and prayers of the maker go into the sash or belt or tump line to protect the wearer. The weaving has continuity, for it may be passed down to generations. And if it's fringe, the fringe on the ends of the belt or the sash or any garment, she says, may both sweep the ground, making contact with earth, and moving with air, bringing prayer up to the Creator. And again, whether you're a believer or not, whatever your religious belief is, just the power of metaphor of that, the poetry of it is very beautiful, I find. So then what else do you need? You need pots. You need to be able to cook. And this pot was created by Nosopoket, Ramona Peters. A number of you may have heard of her. She's a revered elder. She's a former tribal preservation officer. She's the founder of the Native Land Conservancy, one of the founders. And if you're interested in the whole land back movement, which is, again, across America, if you're interested in it locally, you have land that you might want to give back to the tribe, you can do it through the Native Land Conservancy. It's a really easy and good way to do it. So Ramona talks about how her pots each have a spirit, and the creations are a bit like children. They're especially vital when she's creating them, although she may forget where they've gone once they've been fired and sent out into the world. I love that. She basically taught herself the art. She says that her family has had pieces of ceramics, though we don't know how old they are, and she examined those along with museum collections to figure techniques out. How to use styluses to indent or emboss, paddles with cords wrapped around them to press into wet clay. So she says the pots she makes are culturally informed by her ancestors. The shape is traditional with rounded bottoms which receive heat differently than a flat-bottomed pot, and the heat is distributed into a circle. And she talks about how important the circle is in the same way that Anawan does. We didn't have square shapes in our culture, she says. Shapes were lines or curves or spirals. And that the fire will go around the piece of wood and the pot will mimic the fire's shape. If any of you here are potters, raise your hands, because I want to ask you if you think this pot was thrown. So this pot was not thrown. These pots were not thrown. They're amazing. They're coiled. And some of the pots can be huge. And they were used for many different things. At one period in the history here in the East, they were used as funerary pots. They can be used for storage, for water, for all kinds of things that you would use a pot for cooking. But it's amazing, if you go to the Salt Pond Visitor Center or the Eastham Historical Society, you can see these pots live, and they're so thin that you would imagine at first sight that they were thrown. They weren't, and nor are they fired in a kiln, as we think of a kiln. There's an outdoor fire, and they're fired outdoors. In fact, Ramona talks about how the earth, the clay, the fire, and the water, all these elements are so important to her and to the tribe, and how much the pot represents and interacts with those elements of earth, air, fire, and water. These are, if anybody can guess where the clay from these came from, it's, my informants are both Aquinnah Wampanoag and Mashpee Wampanoag, by the way. So these are Aquinnah-made pots. It's a pot that, as I understand it, Gladys Wittes, the late Gladys Wittes, kind of invented from the Gay Head, the colored clays at Gay Head. And it's now become a tradition on the island, and there are other potters. I think the Vanderhoop family makes these as well. And they're just beautiful. Yeah. So we come to wampum, and I always say that I could write a whole book on wampum. So if I go on too long about wampum, you can shut me up. But we know about wampum as something that we can wear. We know about it as jewelry, but there's so much more to wampum. So this is an alliance belt, a traditional belt created by Elizabeth James Perry, Aquinnah Wampanoag, who is a National Endowment of the Arts Foundation recipient, and she is the informant for my chapter on wampum. Wampum has ceremonial significance. She talks about how ocean water is the origin of life, so important to coastal and island people, and we draw sustenance from it a lot of the year, whether clams, lobsters, or whales, or whether from the whelks and the clams from which the wampum is made. It's very much of the sea giving us beloved food, she says, and the connection to water as medicine confers great spiritual power to it. She talks about how it has a lot to do with acknowledging connections between the sea and sky, and how in many respects it defines her as a Wampanoag woman. I want to just look for something in my notes if I can find it. Bear with me. Yeah, she says, there's a nice steady quality to the traditions and the knowledge keeping used to cement alliances and agreements, which are used to strengthen bonds between humans and the universe. It's this witnessing material that's present in any important event today, and it's an ancient tradition with a lot of complexity to it, with a lot of specialized knowledge which is not publicly shared. It's a social medium, and that's how, she says, Algonquian people envisioned it and how it was developed. There were ceremonial belts, such as the one that Anawan is wearing, and ones that are more complex, that essentially were, the word I always get wrong, mnemonics, memory devices for those who could read them. They were really like sacred texts, particularly amongst the Iroquoian people. There are belts that have, and amongst the Wampanoag and Algonquian people, there are belts that have history, there are belts that indicate tribal alliances, If a belt is given to another group and it has white on it, it might signify that there's peace in the transaction. If it has red on it, it might signify that there's hostility and war coming. So it's much more subtle than the thing that we think about. And of course, we think about wampum as currency. And that was a kind of bastardization of the sacred element of wampum. Now, there were two types there were discoidal beads and cylindrical beads, and they were in purple and they were in white. And the white was more for the lighter, according to Elizabeth, the lighter, more innocent side of life. Children might wear a piece with more white beads, and the purple is more for the hardship and the darker side of life. And there again, that's the duality that's represented in the two colors is very typical of the way of thought that, as she says, it's not good and evil, it's not judgmental, it's more just of a balance between the forces in life. Now this is a kind of cramped picture of King Philip, and he's wearing a very famous and important belt, which probably had his clan, some history, his status, all kinds of things on that belt. And don't quote me, but I think it was 9 yards long. I do have it in the book, the exact length of it. But this belt disappeared after King Philip's War. And King Philip's War in 1675, 1676 was alleged to be the bloodiest war per capita that this continent has seen. And the horror was, as some of you may know, that King Philip's head was cut off once he was captured and put on a pike at Plymouth, where it was exhibited for a year or more. And other of the tribal members who were captured were sold into slavery, many down to the Caribbean. So the belt was lost. They think it went to Captain Benjamin Church. He gave it to somebody else. Paula Peters has documented some of this. And so Paula and other members of the tribe tried to find where the belt might be in England during the Plymouth 400th. They went over to some of the museums and looked in their archives. Long and short, they couldn't find it, and a lot of access was denied. And so the tribe decided to create their own belt, a ceremonial belt, which has been exhibited around the Cape. It was at the Cahoon Museum of American Art. It was at Cape Cod Community College. If you ever have a chance to see it, there's a wonderful exhibition because they've created panels of information that go with the belt. And again, there's tons of symbolism. There's the whale, there's the tree of life, there's the protective wolf, there's deer, there's people dancing. And many of the beads were crafted by Hartman Dietz and a couple of other artisans, and the creation was overseen by Julia. But what was so cool was, and I saw this with my own eyes, anybody in the tribe could add beads to the belt. And I was there when one woman did. And when she did that, she said, I have chills all over my body, because it connected her to her heritage. And the Wampanoag considered these wampum beads to be alive, to have spirit, even as the cedar does, as everything does. And so, in a sense, they want this belt to call back Philip's belt, and maybe in some way it can call it back to the tribe. Then what else do we need? What's really important? We need to get dressed. So, of course, Wampanoag people, dress like everybody else. But if you're going to powwow or you have a ceremonial event, you might want regalia. And the woman who calls herself the Vera Wang of the tribe is Anita Peters' Mother Bear. And these are crafted by Mother Bear. It's a breech breech clout and leggings. Some clothing is, as I say, symbolic for use in ceremony. Famously, the jingle dresses of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, which have curative powers in them. So similarly here, clothing will have symbols on it indicating status, clan affiliation, personal vision, tribal history. And Anita says that many Wampanoag create their own regalia, and I think, such as, I love this, I absolutely love this. This is David Whedon and Linda Coombs in regalia that they've created. It's just so beautiful. So some people create their own, but some people will come to Anita and work with her to create something. And in the past, she says, hides were brain tanned, sewn with bone needles, and designs were painted from minerals of graphite, red and yellow ochre, ground up and mixed with bear fat, applied with a little stick. But, she says, now I can go to Joanne's Fabrics and there aren't many bears there. She's got a really wry sense of humor. She's got a sticker on the back of her car that says, please don't feed the pilgrims. So, let's see. This is Julia Marden in regalia that she created. She's holding a traditional turkey feather fan. Really beautiful. So, adornment. It's not essential, but it's nice. And as with everything, adornment has meaning in it. This is a highly enlarged, smaller scrimshaw piece by Jonathan James Perry, Elizabeth Perry's brother, who creates pipes. He creates adornment that is really that synthesis between traditional and modern, using ancient and modern techniques in metal, rock, stone, and bone. And his pieces reflect the philosophy and the belief. This is called Balanced Face. It's a hand-carved face effigy on ivory with scrimshaw, serpent, thunderbird, and traditional tattoo designs, he says. And he says all Algonquian belief is similar. It's balance, the duality of the above world and the below world. It's like why you braid your hair. You're bringing together mind, body, and spirit every day. If not, you go out of balance and become unhealthy. So what's interesting to me about this is that those symbols are pretty universal to Algonquian people. That is the underwater serpent, and he's known by a lot of different names. Mishipeshu is one amongst the Anishinaabe. I believe it's Habamak here. I've never been told that for sure, but studies of the etymology that I've done lead me to believe that it is the same. And the thunderbirds on the other side. And in a lot of Algonquian belief, there is wars between the above and the below, between the thunderbirds and the water spirit. And that underwater serpent was a protector of copper in certain tribes, and there were vast trade networks amongst tribes. Again, there was, a lot of sophistication, not only in their arts, but in their language and in the networks that they established with each other of trade for centuries and centuries. There's a lot of interesting tales about the conflict and the balance between the two, and that may be, Jonathan didn't tell me, but that may be the Star Road, the Milky Way Road, which would kind of be the path of balance between the two things. I'm not sure that that's correct. It's just a guess. This is these are earrings that he created, and these to me look like they're lightning come down from heaven. He calls them harpoon earrings. They're cold hammered copper, They did not melt copper and pour it into molds. Instead, it could be warmed and hammered and annealed and turned into something beautiful like this. It's a perfect combination of traditional and modern. This completely essentializes that, symbolizes that for me. Another piece of Jonathan's, a gorget in copper, again with a lot of star, sun, moon symbolism on it. And then back to the everyday, the not sacred, the profane, if you would, the daily and beautiful wampum. I think these were by Carol Lopez and her daughter. I know it's in the book. I have an appendix at the back of the book where you can get in touch with artists and their websites. And everything in the book is labeled, with who made what. So this brings us to transition. So yes, there actually are some artists in the tribe who do create what we do in the West, that is to say, art that is to hang on a wall. However, they are influenced by their tribal traditions, and their work is infused with symbolism from their tribal traditions. And this is by Robert Peters, and it's himself in the sweat house, and the visions are coming into him, into the sweat. And he's a really fascinating guy. He's beloved by the tribe. His art is beloved. He lived, he's retired now, but he kind of lived between two worlds as a Wampanoag who wanted to practice his traditions, but a guy who was working for the MBTA. So he really is and was between two worlds. He's self-taught. He talks about how he spent years just doing things in pen and ink before he felt he was good enough to go back to try acrylics. And now he's been painting for years. And he says, I wanted to pick the way we are now, not the past, although the past informs the present through the continuation of traditions, particularly ceremonial ones. We're here now. This is what we experience now. This is what we go through now. That's what I know. I have an interview with him in the book that's one of my favorite parts of the book, because he talks about his life and trying to come home and fusing two worlds. And he's a firekeeper, and he talks about what that means and how that came to be. Really, really interesting man and a great artist. This is a piece that he says Native people identify with very much, almost more than any of his other pieces. And he says it is himself. And I wonder if any of you would like to take a guess as to why. So it's the alienation. It's the coyote there is beleaguered by civilization. There's less and less room for him as he stands there howling above what's taking over his turf. And then we come lastly to Emma Jo Mills Brennan. She's an old friend of mine, and she's a multimedia artist. She's a musician and composer. You can get her compositions, her flute and piano compositions on her CDs, Breath of Prayers. She is not necessarily painting out of a tribal tradition per se, but deeply influenced by nature and color and light. Although she does use, as in this bean pot, or more traditionally this, the offering, which has a lot of elements of tribal stuff in it, the storage basket, the corn, the quahog shells, and her embroidery called the Gatherer. I don't have a picture of it today, but I do have it in a book, and I kind of like to end on it. By the way, I just want to say about wampum, because I get questions about this, how incredible it was that it could be made, because it was likely done with stone drills, to create those beads. And I did want to talk about currency and how that came into being, and I distracted myself. So this guy named Isaac de Rozier came to Plymouth Colony. He was a Dutchman in 1627, and he saw that a medium of exchange was wampum. And he thought, oh, well, I think I'll take that back to the Dutch colonies in New York, and that would make a good type of currency. And that's kind of how the change from the sacred use to the profane use of using it for currency started to happen. And it was made easier by I mean, contact was mostly bad if you were Wampanoag, but there were things that they could take from the English that were useful, and one of them was nails. So you could create a nail bow drill that would make wampum a whole lot faster than a stone drill. But also, the faster you could make it, the more you could make, and so the English bastards that they were, forgive me, they would, not all bad, but they would demand lengths, fathoms of wampum from sacums as tribute, a kind of protection racket. Not very nice. So I don't want to end on a negative note, but I will. I like to end with something that Emma talks about. So at the Mashpee Wampanoag Museum, she has a piece of fabric art that was commissioned. It's called One Sustains Us, One Does Not. And she says, I chose to show all the wildlife covered by a golf course. I used to go to that bog ditch with a cousin when we were young. The ditch was black with pollywogs, wagging their little tails, black with them. Did they inform anyone before they just filled it in? We just cover life like that. So that is the end of my talk. If anyone has questions, I would love to answer them. Thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, I do have my book. I don't think I brought it. I have my book for sale. It's $20, and I've got a brand new book, Dreaming Monomoy's Past, Walking Its Present, The Interacting Nature and Culture of a Typical Coastal Area, a Subjective and Objective Account. It's a redo of a book I did in the 90s. It was a bit of a local cult classic, and I was very thankful to have a grant from the Chatham Cultural Council to redo the book, so that's also there. And I also, lastly, before I take questions, I want to thank you guys for having me. It's an honor to be here. And I want to thank Tom Ryan, because my Wampanoag Art book would not have been produced without his support. It would never have seen the light of day. Okay, now I'll take questions. Okay, yes.
On the picture that you had just before this slide, there was a doll with no facial features. Is there a reason why they...
That's really interesting, and I've been asked that, and I don't know. I don't know the answer. I haven't asked Emma Jo. I don't think that it has to do with anything sacred, a don't tell, don't see, don't look. I think it's just her own artistic predilection to have done it that way, is my guess. Yeah. Yes?
I was wondering if you had any insight as to why the native people chose jewelry, beads, sashes, as an art form, as opposed to, say, the human figure like the Greeks or the Romans, animals. We know that you showed us they could carve, they work in clay. Any ideas?
That's really interesting, and no. I don't, except that I've done a couple of cover stories for Artscope magazine on indigenous art across America, and universally it's non-representational. I mean, unless you are a transitional modern artist, in which case it becomes, especially after the ledger art of the Plains Indians, it starts to become more representational. But I think that the mindset was that the abstraction, the symbolism, would carry more weight than the representational. That is just a guess, but you've now made me curious, and I'm going to have to try to figure that one out. If anyone else has any ideas, any art historians, about that. By the way, I wanted in this book to let the artists speak their own truth. I did not go at this as an art historian. I just wanted them to be able to say why they do their art, how they do their art, and what they do, without any of my, any constructs from me put over that. Yes. Yes.
For Cape Phillips belts, do we have any accurate historical idea of what the mnemonic was, what the pictures were?
Yeah, no, other than that picture. And if you go, you can go online and take a look and get, it's really hard to.
So that's the only.
That's pretty much as far as I know.
Was that a first-hand?
Yes,
drawing?
it was,
Okay.
apparently, and remade through the ages. As far as I know, there is no real documentation of what was on that bell. The person who would know better than I is Paula Peters on that, and so she's at Smoke Signals. She might. You can look her up, and the belt was at the Box Museum in England, so there would be information at the box, which might answer your question better than I can. Yes.
This is more about you. How did you become interested
Yeah.
in this art and this culture and this history? What can you just tell us about the beginning of your journey?
It seems I've been obsessed with things native since I was 19. I would go to I was in theater, but I would go to the New York Public Library genealogical wing, and I would read all the anthropology I could get my hands on, and the U.S. Bureau of American Ethnology bulletins, and the Journal of American Folklore, and I would go up to the Hay Museum and look at artifacts before it eventually turned into the, and it just was, I'm not sure why it was so attractive. One of the reasons could be that when I was acting, agents would say to me, we can't use you, you're too dark, you're too Native American looking. And I had friends, I had a couple of girlfriends who were so lovely, and it wasn't like being, it wasn't the kind of I'm Indian thing, pride that came later, but they were Kiowa, one was Kiowa, one was Iowa. And so that also, they were so not jealous women that appealed to me. And then, make a long story longer, my dad gave me a book by John Bonafanti on Squanto, Tisquantum, and the Wampanoag. And that got me, before I had moved to the Cape, that got me totally hooked. And so when I came here, I made friends, and like Earl Mills, I would ask him a ton of questions, and I would listen, and I would go to things, and it's just somewhere back there. I have some big amount of Denisovian genetics, Neanderthal and Denisovian, more than most people, like 7.5%. So somewhere back there, there's that, I want to be outdoors thing, and that connected me also because. I taught environmental ed for years. I love being outdoors, and that's a real bond between myself and the lifeway that was and still is in great part practice. So that's a long-winded answer, but thanks for asking. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm curious, is that the Three Sisters?
Yes, it is. Good for you. I didn't realize, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's corned bean and squash. Corned bean and squash. And it's interesting, Linda Coombs, who is Mashpee Wampanoag and has written a fantastic book called The Wampanoag. Get it. It's really good. She, for some reason, doesn't like saying the three sisters. She says, that's not what we say, but a lot of Wampanoag that I know do say it. But she says, well, that's what the Iroquois say. We don't say, but it is corned bean and squash, yes. Yes. Anybody else? Yes.
Where were the pictures taken of the summer house and the winter house?
One of them was at the Institute of the American Indian, and I have the I have the reference in the book. Another was by Elizabeth James Perry. Another was Robert Peters. All that information is in the book as to where they were. One is the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, so different, and one was Plymouth Patuxent. Yes.
If you want to see some live, there's one at the Mashpee Wampanoag Museum in Mashpee, not the main corporate.
Right.
By the herring run, there's one behind the building. There's also one behind the 6A Yarmouth Port post office in the trails back there.
Right. Which is, it's in the book. It's one that Marcus Hendricks built, but it, tribal members tell me he built it too large, that they would never have it that big. So, and I do have in the book places where you can see this stuff. I do. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so the Wampanoag people of the first light, people of the dawn, are part of the Algonquian language group. That is to say that they all, as we all speak English, we're part of, they all speak the Delaware, the Lenape, the Anishinaabe, many other tribes with other names, the Pequot, the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy. There's a list of tribes that are all related linguistically, all a dialect of the same linguistic roots. Yes, and that's a really good question. Yes, their lifeway and their art is very similar. Absolutely. Good question. Yes.
This might be naive, but it seems to me, I've been to Australia, I've been to Arizona, and the art of all the indigenous people in both those places resembles very much the art that you're showing us.
Oh, that's really interesting, does it?
Symbolisms, the thunderbird, and some of the basic, the undersea serpent and all that.
Really? Oh, that's in Australia? No kidding.
I love their art.
Oh, I'll be darned. I did not know that. That's really interesting. There's an anthropologist of, oh my God, I mean, he's long dead, Stith Thompson, and he has done comparative symbolism books of cross-culturally all around the world, and probably would have that in some of his notations, but that's really interesting.
Some of it's very definite to the region. I mean,
Uh-huh.
kangaroos and
Sure.
stuff like that in Australia, but some of the other, sun and moon and
Mm-hmm.
the basic stuff seems to me that goes through.
It makes sense, because if you're living with the natural world, those are the things that are coming into your life, and those are the things that you're going to represent. You had yours first.
Have you been to the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor in Maine?
No, my book is there, but no, I haven't.
I bought the book there.
Thank you.
That's a wonderful place, though, when you want to learn about all the different tribes and how they, there's all maps and all kinds of things in art, and it's a wonderful museum.
The Abbe, is that?
Abbey, I think it's.
Yes, ABBE. Yeah. And what town is it in Maine?
It's in Bar Harbor.
It's in Bar Harbor. I'll get there. Thank you. And you had a question.
Well, I was just relating to the discussion just now about the similarities of very geographically different, far apart. In 2019, I was in Zimbabwe, Zambia, and
Botswana, and primarily on the Zambezi River, and had the very wonderful good fortune to visit a number of the very, very ancient, currently civilizations living, but the roundhouse, in your picture, looked almost exactly like a rebuilt roundhouse with the termite dust as the mortar.
Oh, wow.
And they were saying they only just recently went to, they had their first square in all their.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Because the roundhouse is so much more efficient, but the modern era of the transitional, as you're saying, is pushing towards the square.
Isn't that, and did everyone hear that? That she, yeah, I mean, that's really, really interesting. Yeah, yeah. There's a common, I mean, somebody could do their PhD thesis on and I'm sure it's been done, on these common threads between indigenous cultures globally around the world. Somebody's coughing. I get everything, so I'm going to. All right, I know some of you want to leave, but thank you. I'll be over there.